substitute teachers of Reddit. What's the worst thing that's happened while you were subbing? Picture the scene. As I'm sat in my office, being a full-time teacher, though, I share the office with about 6 others. A 15-year-old girl is escorted in by the sub for being disruptive in class. I have never met a pupil before. She sits down to do some work she had been given by the sub. I ask her what happened. On this particular day the argument had more or less finished when the sub called her a little freaking bee. At this point I really started paying attention instead of just shooting the breeze. Apparently the pupil and the sub had running battles for the last few years ever since she popped my birthday balloon when I was 12, and it had kicked off once again. The girl in question wasn't normally disruptive, just when this teacher was around. So the lesson finishes and the sub comes to collect the pupil. There's more tension. Sub yells at pupil and then dismisses her. I asked what had happened and she said, well, she was being uncooperative. I suppose she told you I called her a little freaking bee? Well, I did, and I don't regret it, because she is, always has been, and flounced off. She hasn't subbed at the school since, but she may be off somewhere else yelling at kids. I didn't like her. A student once asked me if I would show him my C in front of the class. I asked an aide to take him outside. This was an all-male SH class, and speak to him about proper language. Wrote him up and let him back in. Later in the day I was helping him with some work and he starting whispering C. I tried the conflict resolution plan that the teacher had left me, only riled him up more. We ended up having to send him home as he started screaming C and touching himself. The male aide who came and helped us said this was pretty common behavior for him, which was why he was on a 50% integration plan into SH. That was the end of SH subbing for me. Don't know how people teach SH as a career. SH equals severely handicapped. Dang. We at least just stared at the teacher's butt when she wasn't looking like civilized people. About a month ago I had a student fall to the ground while trying to sit in his chair. Everyone laughed at him and he thought that another student beside him had pulled the chair out from under him. We all agreed that wasn't the case. The student on the ground started hitting the other student in the leg, and I stepped in and told him to knock it off. I turned around to talk to another teacher when student B, the one who was hit, stood up and shoved student A across the room. At that point I jumped in and asked student B what he was thinking. He said, look at my freaking leg, and I looked to see that he had about 1/2 inch of pencil sticking out of the side of his knee. Student A wasn't hitting him. He was stabbing him. 8/10 would cringe again. Nothing too horrible. A kindergartner with emotional issues threw a temper tantrum over not being able to eat in the classroom, complete with hurling water bottles, backpacks, and finally desks. Yup, little kindergarten desks flung across the room. Called the principal. She came in and asked why I didn't just teach class while bear hugging the kid. I refused to sub for that class again until I heard he had been moved to the special ed class. There was a lockdown drill scheduled for 1:15 p.m. However, I couldn't keep track of the kids because I had no roll sheet, no assistants, and no schedule for when kids were to leave my class and go to the mainstream class for a subject. The class was a 6th or 7th grade special ed, and some students were non-verbal. So the drill happened and one of my kids was in another class for music. The principal personally knocked on my door, kid in tow, and coldly told me I was responsible for this kid's life, and that I should never make this mistake again. No kidding. An actual bomb threat explosive near the school. Their code for lockdown bomb threat was to page the previous principal to the office. For example, Mr. Stepanek to the office please. All the regular teachers knew that particular principal had retired. I only knew because someone had offhandedly mentioned it to me during training. So I locked the door from the outside with the key because there was no way to do so from inside. Turned off the lights, drew the blinds, and had the kids get under their desks away from the window. After about a half hour, the phone rang. I may have yelped, and I was filled in. The park next to the school had a pipe bomb in a garbage can. The police were there. They were going to detonate it when they got into position. So about an hour later we all heard a small bang, and it was safe to take the kids to recess. Phew. Junior high is a nightmare. Generally I don't have any control over the classroom and kids start fights with each other. Then they don't do any work and complain to the teacher that I didn't tell them the assignment. High school gifted and talented started aggressively opening all the drawers and cabinets, even though I asked them not to, and then started going through my purse, backpack and lunch bag. I grabbed all my things, yelled at them to sit down in their seats, and stood near the door because I was afraid of them. They then spent the last 15 minutes of class making fun of me. I was bullied as a kid. It didn't go well. There was also no phone to call the office for help. Overall, most days subbing were fine, but those crappy days really stick out in your memory. I'm very thankful to have never had a big emergency. Had a pre-K kid throw a hug temper tantrum because he couldn't sit where he wanted to. He got so freaking crazy that the other teachers, I was in for the aid, had to physically restrain him, and one of the teachers got cut up and was bleeding. The next time I saw the aide I had been in for, she was like, "Heard you had a normal day with student's name." I've subbed for only a semester, but I apparently found the worst students. One class, I had a student decide they wanted to sneak into the dressing rooms. It was a theater class, and start smoking M. I found out about it when they didn't come back after 15 minutes and ended up walking into a room filled with lots of smoke. Another, we had a group of students decide that they were frisky and needed to get their rocks off, so they snuck off during an activity to the dressing rooms again and started to have a gangbang. Yeah, I saw way too much of 5 of those kids. It was kind of awkward explaining to the principal too. I did high school wrong, apparently. I had a sub who was just a horrible person. First, she wouldn't let anyone go to the bathroom under any terms, which was quite messed up because this was a first grade classroom. Because of this, 3 of my classmates had relieved themselves, and she sent them to the principal's office for inappropriate actions. Then, when there was a kid picking up his pencil, she pinched him to get his attention and spit on him for some reason. The majority of my class, then, were of color, and it wasn't obvious that she was xenophobic until she blurted out loud after there was one kid talking out of turn, "You motherfucking idiots. Someone ought to package you in and send you back to Africa." After that, she stormed out of the room and we just sat there in fear until class ended. Did I mention that this was a first grade classroom? We complained to our normal teacher the next day, and then the sub was immediately fired and was stripped of her teaching license. Justice. Frick yeah. My weirdest single day was the first day I subbed in a support unit, special needs classes. I'd only been teaching for about 3 months, and I was willing to take work in any subject area at all. I was with another teacher, supervising an excursion to the Australian National Maritime Museum. The group we were taking was a mix of kids with intellectual disabilities, behavior problems and autism. To get there, we catch public transport. One student becomes so overexcited about being on a bus that she throws up on my shoes. When we get there, I'm lining up my half of the group, maybe 15 kids, and remarking the role. Teacher stuff. One of the higher functioning autistic kids comes up to me and says, "Miss, I think you're doing a really fantastic job, and I want to show you my appreciation by giving you a hug." I start politely explaining that a hug isn't appropriate teacher-student contact, but that a high five or a fist bump is fine. And this kid, 14 year or so, just reaches out and put both his hands on my tee. I shriek in surprise, and the other teacher looks up, comes over and tells the kid off, then says, "Sorry, I should have warned you, he's a groper." I later found out that kid would basically try any excuse to touch female teachers. The best bit of the day, though, is when we're about to go inside the submarine. The submarine is docked in Darling Harbor, which is filthy and full of sharks. To get inside, you have to walk on top of the submarine. One of the kids, as we're on top of the submarine, says, "It's a hot day today, miss. I'm having a swim." Then he takes off all his clothes and starts walking to the edge of the submarine. I have a brief moment of sheer panic where I weigh up my choices. Will I get in more trouble if I tackle a naked 13-year-old boy, or if I let him jump in the harbor? I grab the kid around the chest and yell for the classroom aide to help me. She just replies, "Oh, we're not supposed to touch the kids." Later she says, "You should have let him jump in. Drowning might have taught him a lesson." We're not supposed to touch the kids. What a bold statement. If a child is about to endanger him, herself, or others, you as an adult should step in. The consequence of losing your job is much better than letting a child hurt him, herself, or others. Not a substitute, but here is pretty nasty story. This substitute is an elderly one, 65 years of age. The class she was subbing had a student with extreme anger issues, physical violence, obscenities, gestures, etc. She appeared to have not been notified that this student had such problems and was grossly underprepared. In the middle of class, she said something that set him off. First he threw a water bottle at her, then he threw a chair desk. To top it off, he ran straight at her and smashed her into the teacher's desk hard enough to break her back and a few ribs. Students were so terrified they didn't stop his charge. Only one girl had enough sense to go next door to ask that teacher to dial 911. The sub was taken to the hospital and what happened to the student was never disclosed. Once, I went to a notoriously bad school. In a single morning, I was punched in the boob by a kid during recess supervision. I was charged at by a student during recess, too, and I had 2 kids making out in the back of the classroom. This was a grade 6 class, so 11 to 13-year-olds. When I asked them to stop, other kids in the class said, "And I crap you not, it's okay, they're cousins." In another city's school system, I've been accused of whipping a glue stick at a child's head, hitting a kid over the head with a beater stick. Sure, as a sub it sucked, but remember being a kid and loving sub days because you knew you didn't have to do any real work? I had a teacher tell our class a story about someone who subbed for him once. He was prepping us to please behave, please. In his story, he got back and talked to the sub to see how his class had been the day before. GG sub says, "Oh, the students were fine for pretty much the entire class. Worked well, kept quiet. The only problems cropped up at the very end. Close to the end of school they got out balloons and blew them up, and were bouncing them around the classroom. Teacher is confused. What color were the balloons? Oh, just a normal light tan clear color. They were really big though. Students were bouncing around inflated condoms." This did not happen. No one asks what color were the balloons when someone says they were batting balloons around. My grade 9 English teacher was absent, so they had this young lady sub for her. As usual, I was completely zoned out. She apparently tried to get my attention, but I didn't respond. Some douche in my class then told her that I was deaf. She continued her lesson but would try get me involved by communicating to me via body language. We were sitting in groups, so by this point somebody had told me that I was supposed to be deaf and that I better play along. That lesson was so awkward for me. At the end, when everyone had left, I went up to her and told her that my class was just messing with her. I then apologized profusely. Her reaction was to blush a lot. In retrospect, it was kinda funny. The school caught fire. 24 first graders, and a wall of the building catches fire. Cuts off half the evacuation routes. Everyone is confused and running everywhere. Once we get outside, half the kids are crying hysterically. Half are running around like maniacs trying to be firefighters. I have not set food in an elementary school since. As a full-time teacher, I was responsible for a horrible sub day. Family emergency came up and I had to leave unexpectedly midday. No real sub plans in place for the class from heck. TM. The next morning, the note just listed about 4 names. And then there were more. Many more, referring to about a dozen serious troublemakers. Ran into the sub as she was going to another teacher's class. She still looked shell-shocked, said it was bad. Those kids, but wouldn't elaborate. The first day I subbed for a 4th grade class, I got hit with the info that I had a kid with Tourette's that just picked up a new tic. They didn't go into detail on what it was. I was at my desk and the kid walked by. He leaped like 3 feet in the air and kicked himself in the butt. It really caught me off guard, but none of the kids knew what to think. They all looked at me and the only thing I could think of was get up from my desk, jump up, and kick myself in the butt. They all got up and did it too. Sat down, had a laugh and got back to work. Good on you for dispelling the awkwardness. My first year out of college, I had to sub in a class for a DLP program. This is basically kids with Down syndrome, severe autism, CP, B, etc. Well, there was this one student who had so many disabilities. He was nonverbal, couldn't walk without assistance, and suffered multiple seizures. He also drooled a lot, but was conscious enough to spit it into a spare bottle when sitting at a table. Capital W. You can probably see where this is going, but as an athlete I have become accustomed to drinking water all day. I grabbed a bottle off the table and took a big swig and instantly puked. I had grabbed the wrong bottle by mistake. I drank his spit bottle. It tasted terrible, like watered down, lukewarm, puke broth. It stank, and I went home for the rest of the day. BTW. He thought it was hilarious and laughed the entire time I puked. Since this is a substitute teacher thread, I would like to take the time to thank the good subs of the world. One of the teacher that left a lasting impression on me was an Englishman who used to cover for my high school French teacher. This guy was amazing. He spoke several languages and whenever we needed help he was happy and willing to offer it. Not only that, but after giving us whatever assignment our teacher left us, he would engage us in intelligent conversation. The debates we had in his class were always what the entire class looked forward to when he subbed. I found out like a year after graduation that he had died of cancer. R.I.P. Mr. Unger. Not mine, but my mom's story. First day as a substitute teacher. All is well until she has to put on a movie for the kids. All but one kid who finished his work from yesterday morning got to watch the movie. He had to sit in the back of the class and finish his coloring project. When she told him this, he took his crayons and threw them all over the floor. After she asked him to pick them up, he sat there saying effing crayons as he put each one in the box. Just after she asked him not to use those words. It was a second grade class after all. He flipped over his desk and walked out the door. She then called the office and watched him walk to the end of the hallway and jump the fence and leave campus. The office said they would send someone after him and call the police. Apparently it happened pretty often with this kid. Probably would have been nice to let the sub know that beforehand. TLDR. Kids got problems. I was subbing for a 7th grade math teacher. The students were supposed to be taking a skills assessment on the computers. These tests weren't going to go against their grades or anything. They were just to identify areas where students needed help. So, I quickly noticed that a large amount of students were on Facebook, Twitter. I went up to each kid individually and asked them to just finish the test before they went on Facebook, even if they just blew through it without trying. One student apparently didn't like this, and punched me in the back when I turned around. I have osteoarthritis in my back, so this pretty much took me right out of the game. I ended up having to take a week off of subbing and my night job to recover. Definitely wasn't worth the $80. About a month ago, I had a student ask to go to bathroom. We had like 5 minutes left, so I was like, please wait. He kept bothering me and I said to wait until the class was over. He said in the most calm, collected, Hannibal Lecter voice, I'm going to find out where you live, kill you in your sleep, and then burn your house down. It came completely out of the blue. Everybody in the class was completely shocked. I was at a loss. I said, hold that thought, and then pressed the emergency call button. The school cop took him out of school and I had to file all this paperwork. I even got a special escort of security guards that took me out to my car after school. I ended up driving all over the city, in full panic mode, making sure I wasn't being followed. Then the next week, I had a couple of boys who kept taking videos of me on Vine and tracking me down on Twitter and Facebook. It was at a different school, but I asked the secretary if she could get one of the deans to have them take the videos down. I really didn't care except what had happened with the death threat. I was keeping a low profile. That next week, I found out that all of them had gotten the same punishment. 10 days expelled, in-school suspension, and then behavior school. I tried to get the boys that filmed me out of some of it because it was overkill, but they decided it was stalking and cyberbullying. The one that gave me the death threat, I had to force them to report it to the real cops so there would be a record. TLDR. I got death threats and stalked. The job really sucks. My best was subbing for a 12th grade physics class. I'm a 22-year-old short male. I look like I'm 16 years old, so this class is packed. Maybe a bit under 40 students. Many of them were football players. Tall, many of them black, and big. So class starts and I hand out the work the teacher left. Bunch of busy work no one did. A group of about 5 or 6 of these football players move their desks around and take a small corner of the room. As I'm walking around seeing what's going on, I find that these students had set up a small gambling ring. They each had a few stacks of ones and were throwing dice and bills were getting passed around. I went on to tell them to do their work, which no one did, and apparently should have been more careful because some student came up to me later and told me that those guys looked like they were about to jump me. Same class later in the day, a student nonchalantly smoked some weed and hid it in his jacket as I came by. Not a single person in either class said anything about these events. I have a feeling it's normal at that school. I'm no substitute, but I do remember some pretty strange subs I had throughout elementary school. The strangest out of all of them would have to the sub I had in first grade that tried to convince us that our parents were evil. It was around Christmas time, and our normal teacher was reading us all these Christmas stories like the Polar Express, The Night Before Christmas, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, etc. So we were obviously pumped for Christmas and full of holiday spirit. Well, the next day our teacher was sick and called in a sub. The sub seemed normal at first. She called roll, introduced herself, got to know a few of the students, and all of that jazz. She then moved on to the first activity of the day, read the class a story from our Christmas book. She grabbed the book, stared at it for a bit, then looked up at us and said something along the lines of, "Did you know Santa isn't real? Your parents are lying to you? And I can't believe you little brats trust your parents this much." We all looked at each other in horror. The class just sat in silence as she went on about how our parents were evil and lied to us all the time and that they didn't actually love us. This went on for a few hours, but luckily it was a short day, so we all got picked up at around 12:30 or so. She sent a lot of kids home crying and dead inside, including me. Obviously there were a ton of complaints from the parents and she was never heard of again. If I remember correctly, there was a news article in the newspaper about it. My freshman year in high school, I was struggling in Spanish class. It was the last day before spring break and the sub was just out of college. At our high school we had a built-in sort of instant messaging system called a netsend. This could be native to Ms. I have no clue. It was very similar to email except that sending a message would create a pop-up that brought itself to the front of the screen. This is important later on in the story. I was a young naive freshman, the class clown. It wasn't uncommon for me to get in small stupid bits of trouble. The substitute teacher was hanging out in her office when I heard two upperclassmen sitting at the computer directly behind me talking about some sort of code they figured out in regards to our netsend system. All I heard was, "If you hit the enter button, this will go out to every computer on campus." Before I could think, I turned around and slammed my finger on the button waiting for a funny reaction from the guys. Turns out I just sent a direct message to all 9,000 accounts on our school's network that politely said "frick you be." The sub found out and decided that it would be best to lock the classroom door, unplug the computer, and box it up in her office. It took 2 minutes for Digital Phil, the computer tech, to bust in the room and ask about what happened. We were caught, but we had no idea of the fallout. Netsends apparently can't be erased, so I heard about people logging into their account months later being welcomed with a nice "frick you be." A 5th grade classroom was watching a PowerPoint slideshow during the send and I'm sure that went well. One of the teachers everyone hated thought that we sent it only to her and left school because of an emotional breakdown. I ended up lucky with only a 1-day suspension since I didn't really know what I was doing. TLDR. Sent an IM to all 9,000 faculty and students at my high school saying "frick you be." Sub tried to cover it up, was never seen at school again. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.